Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sean Derns, and I'm a senior research analyst for CAMERA. We're pleased to have Ricky Hollander with us to discuss blood libels, conspiracies, and coronavirus. Ricky is a senior media analyst at CAMERA and co-author of Indicting Israel, New York Times coverage of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. She investigates and speaks about anti-Semitism, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and their coverage in the media. Her analysis, commentary, and letters have been featured in National Review, Spectator, Newsweek, Middle East Quarterly, Israel Hayom, American Thinker, and Chicago Sun-Times, among elsewhere. Ricky studied at Jerusalem's Hebrew University before completing her undergraduate and graduate degrees at McGill. She engaged in biochemical, genetic, and epidemiology research before applying her analytical and research training to the media. To ask a question, please hover your mouse or clicker over the screen, and you'll see a question and answer box. Please type in your question, and we'll get to them at the conclusion of Ricky's talk. With that, it's a privilege to have you with us, Ricky.
Thank you very much, Sean, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you who have tuned in this afternoon. Our topic today concerns the age-old hatred of Jews, and more specifically, the libels and conspiracy theories that are classic manifestations of this hatred. Since medieval times, these anti-Jewish libels have persisted, wielded as a weapon to incite against the Jews. They come from both Christians and non-Christians, from the far right and the far left. And while they're less prevalent at times, they've never quite disappeared and are always more prevalent during times of adversity like the current pandemic. I'll focus on several examples of historical libels and show their persistence into modernity. And I'll analyze the basic elements of the blood libel that have been used to attack Jews through the years, spotlighting the lessons we learned from history in identifying, exposing, and combating this vehicle of racism. Charges of ritual murder are believed to have been directed mainly against Christians by pagans in the Hellenistic Roman world during the first decade of the Common Era, with only 2 recorded accusations of ritual murder directed at the Jews during that time. It was only in the Middle Ages, after Europe had already adopted Christianity, that charges of ritual murder became the basis of recurring anti-Jewish libels. The blood libel is based on the primitive superstition that Jews are agents of the devil seeking to harm, brutalize, and murder non-Jews in order to benefit the Jewish community or nation. To recognize the elements that make up the blood libel and its variants, we need to go back to medieval times, to the 12th century when the first medieval blood libel was recorded. The year was 1144 CE. It was late March, just before Easter, when a young 12-year-old boy, a tanner's apprentice by the name of William, was found dead in the woods near the British town of Norwich, his body bearing signs of torture. The boy's uncle, a local priest, publicly blamed William's murder on the town's Jews and turned to the bishop to demand that the accused be tried by ordeal. In other words, trial by torture and danger, where survival would determine innocence and death would determine guilt as a judgment handed down by God. Norwich's Jews, however, were not under the jurisdiction of the church, but under the protection of the local sheriff, who found no evidence implicating the Jews for the murder, and so the trial never took place. Some of the locals declared the boy a martyr and a saint, and the boy was reburied from the place where he was killed into a monk's cemetery. But the real cult of devotion to William was promoted several years later by Thomas of Monmouth, a monk who moved to the town several years after the murder, and who wrote a multi-volume hagiography called The Life and Passion of Saint William, the Martyr of Norwich. The libel he expanded on was based largely on the defamatory testimony of Theobald, a former Jew who had converted to Christianity and became a monk. Theobald declared that Jews could only return to their ancestral homeland, to the land of Israel, if they sacrificed a Christian boy in contempt of the Christian religion. That every year, a cabal of Jewish rabbis and leaders would meet to decide by lot which Jewish community would carry out the ritual. And in the year 1144, he said the lot had fallen on the Jews of the Jewish community of Norwich. But the Jews managed to bribe their way out of being found guilty by paying off the sheriff for protection. Theobald's testimony was considered authoritative because he claimed that as a Jew at the time, he knew all about these nefarious plans. So in this medieval libel, we see the roots and elements of the anti-Semitic libels that were to follow. One, its underlying basis, which is the murder or harming of non-Jews in order to benefit the Jews. And that's at the root of all anti-Jewish libels and tropes, and it's the basis of the current coronavirus libels. Two, the cabal of elders who conspire to orchestrate nefarious control. This is the basis of the fabricated protocols of the elders of Zion, which described a Jewish plan to dominate the world. That was published in 1903 in Russia. It's also the root of Nazi propaganda and imagery showing Jewish domination of the world and of non-Jews. And it's also the basis of the current day demonization of AIPAC and other Jewish organizations. Three, Jewish fealty to the land of Israel as the reason and source of the ritual. The land of Israel takes center stage in today's dual loyalty tropes and the demonization of the Jewish state, of course. Four, Jewish money and bribery buying off officials. That's echoed in today's accusations of Jewish corruption and bribery, the wealthy Jewish lobby, Jewish control of banks, greedy Jew tropes, etc. Five, the written record as an essential tool to validate and authenticate and spread the libel. And this is a role played by today's media or internet forums and the like. Six, the as a Jew contribution to the defamation of Jews, which we've seen again and again throughout time. With Thomas of Monmouth, the idea of ritual murder as an Easter/Passover ritual was born, and the William of Norwich libel became the prototype of the medieval blood libel. A youth would go missing or was found dead. The family or local community would blame the town's Jews, accusing them of ritual bloodletting to reenact and mock the crucifixion. Although it was nurtured by Christian theological belief regarding Jews, the blood libel was rooted in other factors as well, particularly economic resentment. As commerce in Europe increased and with Jews barred from guilds and from owning land, Jews entered and became successful in trade, banking, and money lending. And the local peasantry's dependence on Jewish money lending and resentment of Jewish economic achievement grew. So the blood libel became a vehicle for Jew haters to rid themselves of Jews or their financial debts to Jews, or as an opportunity to loot and appropriate the belongings of Jews, all under the self-righteous banner of exacting retribution for a demonic crime. In most cases, Jews were physically tortured to extract the confessions that would become the basis of further libels. And as the blood libels spread to the rest of Europe, they took on a new twist as well. The ritual bloodletting involved the use of Christian blood for the baking of matzahs, the unleavened bread that's consumed by Jews on Passover. Now, the ludicrous nature of this charge, I mean, the Torah forbids the consumption of any sort of blood, let alone the murder of any human being. But this presented no hindrance to the spreading of this libel, just as the extent of absurdity of any particular libel is of no concern to those spreading it today. And in fact, it's this last iteration, the matzah iteration of the blood libel, that's best known and that has persisted through the years. Blood libels were used in England, France, Germany, and the rest of Christian Europe during the Middle Ages, with dire consequences for Jews who were tortured, burnt to death, their communities destroyed. In 1475, a blood libel was raised in the Italian city of Trent when a toddler by the name of Simon went missing just before Easter. Incited by an itinerant cleric who had spent the season preaching against the Jews, the inhabitants of Trent were quick to implicate the Jews in Simon's murder. And when his body was found, historians believe it was planted in a water cellar in the home of a Jewish resident, the town's Jews were arrested and physically tortured for weeks on end until the desired confession about Jewish Passover rituals was extracted. The Jewish male prisoners were executed and the women and children expelled from the town. The Prince Bishop of Trent, Johannes Hinderbach, attempted to have Simon canonized, and he enlisted poets, artists, and writers to graphically describe the alleged bloodletting and to condemn the Jews. And despite a papal investigation that found the Jews innocent, Hinderbach succeeded in having Simon venerated as a martyr for almost 500 years until 1965, when the Second Vatican Council suppressed the cult. What's notable about this case is its demonstration of the crucial role played by the newly invented printing press in widely disseminating and establishing a libel that would have otherwise remained localized. The printed accounts that were obtained through torture, as well as woodcut illustrations of the alleged murder that appeared in print, gave the libel authority and credibility, promoting the cult of Simon and perpetuating the myth of Jewish ritual murder that has persisted. Despite the removal of Simon from the Roman martyrology some 55 years ago, in 1965, stories, poems, and illustrations of his supposed martyrdom continued to circulate, and sculptures and paintings depicting him as a saint or cherub can be found in Trent today. Some are unlabeled and without explanation that he's actually not considered a saint or martyr by the Catholic Church, or that he was the subject of a false anti-Jewish libel. And without this explanation, the belief among some remains that the blood libel represents historical truth. And so the myth about Simon was revived again during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in Italy, as my colleague at camera, Christian media analyst Dexter Van Zyl, exposed and publicized. Toward the end of March, when the numbers of Italians infected with COVID-19 was drastically rising, with death rates nearly 40% at that time, and Italy at the epicenter of the global pandemic, the blood libel was revived by this young Italian artist, Giovanni Gasparo, who's a popular painter of religious themes in Italy and whose work decorates cathedrals and basilica there. Now, he apparently deemed the moment appropriate to revive the Simon of Trent libel by posting a photo on his Facebook page of his painting entitled The Martyrdom of Saint Simon of Trento for Jewish Ritual Murder. And I will show you a detail from that painting now. So as you can see, it shows these ugly, this is just a small, or not a small, this is just part of the painting, and it shows the ugly details, the hideous caricatures of leering Jews with hooked noses and bared teeth. One of them's wrapped in a prayer shawl, and they're surrounding and torturing this young child who's suffering and who has a halo around his head. It could have come straight out of Der Stürmer, this painting. Now, Dexter not only emailed the artist directly to ask why he would post such a gruesome, hateful image, especially during such a time, but he also contacted the Papal Nuncio in DC to request that he alert the proper officials in the Vatican about it. Dexter wrote about the issue to publicize it, pointing out that Gasparo's painting contravenes the letter and spirit of the 1965 Nostra Aetate Declaration by the Second Vatican Council, which repudiated anti-Semitism and it contradicts similar church statements that followed. And as a result of the condemnation from Catholics like Dexter, as well as from other Christians and Jews who were alerted to this, a prominent Italian bishop denounced the anti-Semitic painting in an influential Catholic newspaper in Italy. It's just this sort of exposure and repudiation that's necessary to combat anti-Semitism and the ugly libels that prop it up. And it's crucial that they be exposed and condemned wherever they come from and however ancient they are. Now, although the classic blood libel was ostensibly rooted in early European Christianity, unlike other long extinguished medieval beliefs, it has not been put to rest, nor is it confined, or has it been confined just to Europe or to Christians alone. Take, for example, the Damascus Affair, a classic blood libel with deadly consequences that was initiated in February 1840, which was considered an enlightened time, an enlightened era. Against the backdrop of rival political alliances in Ottoman-ruled Damascus, Father Thomas, a Capuchin monk, and his Muslim servant Ibrahim Amara went missing. And while the facts of the story did not indicate Jewish involvement in their disappearance, the primitive blood libel was raised against Damascus Jews who were accused of murdering the monk and his servant in order to use their blood for Passover rituals. 13 Jewish men were arrested and tortured to extract confessions. One converted to Islam to escape further torture, while 4 others died from the torture. There were riots against the Jewish community. A synagogue was attacked. Torah scrolls were destroyed. The inciter behind this libel and the bogus trial that followed was the French consul, who was a corrupt and notorious anti-Semite. And he was aided by the Egyptian governor of Damascus. Protests by Western Jewry in Europe and in America, as well as the personal intervention of prominent Jews, including Moses Montefiore and Adolphe Crémieux, eventually prompted the release of the surviving prisoners, although not their exoneration. The Jewish delegation also succeeded in getting the Ottoman Sultan to issue a royal decree repudiating blood libels against Jews. So there are 2 lessons to be learned from this affair, one negative and one positive. On the negative side, the Damascus Affair demonstrated that the medieval blood libel was alive and well, readily accepted as truth, not only by the Catholic community, but by local Muslims as well, and even by some influential European newspapers, which treated the accusations as true, or at least as a valid topic of debate, with the underlying assumption that ritual murder was an established Jewish practice. On the positive side, we see how Jewish solidarity and international activism in Europe and in America, publicizing and protesting against the racist libel, succeeded in saving many of the Jewish victims from death and influenced world opinion. One can only imagine what the consequences might have been had there been no outcry against the libel. But while marginalized, the libel lives on, particularly in the Muslim and Arab world, as a tool to demonize Jews. Field Marshal Mustafa Tlass, Syria's defense minister from the early 1970s until 2004, he died 3 years ago, but he revived the Damascus blood libel in a book he published in 1983 while still defense minister. It was entitled The Matzah of Zion, and I'm going to show you the cover of that book. As you can see, it's gruesome like the painting was. So Tlass insisted that the Damascus libel represented the truth about Jews and their rituals, that his book was a historical study, that it was based on documentary evidence. He said, he wrote this in this book, with the publication of this book, he wrote, I intended to illuminate some of the secrets of the Jewish religion by describing the actions of the Jews, their blind and repugnant fanaticism regarding their belief, and the implementation of the Talmudic precepts compiled in the diaspora by their rabbis who distorted the principles of the Jewish belief as it is said in the Quran 279. By referencing the Quran here, he turned a Christian libel into a Muslim one. He also demonstrated how fungible and adaptable the ancient blood libel was. Zionism and the Jewish state had become the representative and stand-in for the Jews, and the Israeli defensive military actions had become the replacement of the matzah bakers seeking blood. So he not only wrote about the blood libel as truth, but he linked new blood libels to it. The 1840 incident, Tlass wrote, recurred several times in the 20th century when the Zionists carried out the mass crimes in Palestine and Lebanon, acts that shocked the conscience of good people all over the world and were condemned by world public opinion. But each time, the Zionist financial, media, and political influence managed to pacify the anger and distract the people from these crimes. Instead of being punished, the Zionists received a reward: great financial aid and horrifying stockpiles of advanced weaponry, close quote. Tlass not only presented this ludicrous blood libel as historic truth, but he equated this libel, the same libel, to Israel's defense forces. And he used many of the same elements. And in this way, he demonstrated how much modern day anti-Israel libels are rooted in the medieval blood libel. Now, the ones who used blood libels and conspiracy theories to the most devastating effect were, of course, the Nazis. The May 1934 edition of Julius Streicher's Der Stürmer was a special edition of the blood libel under the headline "Jewish Murder Plan Against Gentile Humanity Revealed." So this is the cover of that edition, that special edition that was devoted to the blood libel. This libel, Der Stürmer, and these type of libels that they promoted were the propaganda tools that paved the way for bringing the Nazi regime to power and allowing it to carry out its genocidal war on Jews. The same Nazi propaganda and imagery continues to populate neo-Nazi and white supremacist sites, as well as BDS and anti-Zionist sites. In the Muslim and Arab world, old blood libels exist alongside newer variations, with the stage set by Tlass's book, which was a bestseller in the Arab world. They are tools of incitement against Jews in the form of Zionists, and actually Jew and Zionist is used interchangeably. A multi-episode series broadcast on Hezbollah TV in 2003 purported to expose the criminal history of Zionism, focusing on the ritual murder of a Christian's child by Jews who use his blood to bake matzahs. An article posted on Hanan Ashrawi's organization's website, Mifta, in 2013, presented the blood libel as accepted fact and questioned whether then President Obama knew the truth about the connection between Passover and Christian blood and Jewish blood dances regarding a Seder he was hosting at the White House. A pseudo-documentary on YouTube entitled Jewish Kabbalistic Occult Ritual Child Murder Throughout History was posted to the Boycott Israel Support BDS Facebook group and can still be found on the internet, uploaded by neo-Nazis, anti-Zionists, and other Jew haters. Baroness Jenny Tong, a British politician and a notorious anti-Semite and BDS activist, just last year posted on her Facebook page an Arab media article about an IDF raid that allegedly injured a Palestinian infant. This article was posted just before Passover. All for the Passover, she captioned her post. Now, a variant of this libel is that Jews/Zionists intentionally kill young Palestinians in order to harvest their organs, either for experiments or as part of a devious scheme to make money. Now, this form of blood libel is not only popular among Palestinians in the Middle East, but has also been promoted on college campuses by BDS-affiliated college professors. But now I want to turn to another variant of libel, the anti-Jewish conspiracy theory that's particularly popular during the COVID-19 pandemic. It arose during the bubonic plague that killed more than a third of Europe's population in the mid-1300s. Jews there too were seen as Satan's agents who, while not accused of slaughtering Christian youth in Passover rituals, were blamed for trying to destroy the Christian world by poisoning wells and creating a plague that would kill off non-Jews so that the Jews could take over. The pattern and the goal was the same. Jews were tortured until the desired confessions were obtained, and over 200 Jewish communities across Switzerland and Germany were destroyed in massacres and pogroms, their belongings looted. Now, the PLO frequently uses this version of the libel. In fact, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas presented this libel in a speech to the European Parliament in 2016 when he accused rabbis in Israel of pushing the Israeli government to poison Palestinian water sources in order to kill off the Palestinian populace. Of course, after the libel was exposed and condemned widely, he was forced to retract his statement and apologize. Now, we've seen various elements and versions of this libel during the current pandemic, with the most extreme one being that Jews or the Jewish state are conspiring to kill off non-Jews with COVID-19 in order to take over and gain more power and control or kill their enemies. Neo-Nazi and former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke devoted a podcast to the theory that Jewish Zionists, radical Jewish elites, the Israeli government, the Mossad, all his boogeymen, might be trying to kill off the US president and their enemies in the Muslim world. How? By getting hold of the virus and then using young Jews with immunity to pretend that the virus is actually hand sanitizer and smear it on their hands, and then somehow gain access to the US president as well as the Iranian and Arab leaders, and then shake hands with them and thus infect them with a virus to which they would succumb. Duke had it all figured out. In the fevered imagination of the Jew hater, no demonic theory is too absurd to believe or to promote. In February, when the pandemic was starting to be recognized, an Iraqi political analyst proclaimed on TV that the coronavirus was an American Jewish plot to reduce the world's population. Iran's Islamist regime promoted similar conspiracy theories on Iranian TV. A physician on a televised panel discussion about the pandemic, a panel discussion by so-called experts, insisted that this was an ethnic weapon that was created through an American-Israeli collaboration in order to cause high mortality rates among certain races. A Pakistani Taliban document accuses Jews of launching a virus war with COVID-19 so that Jews can rule the world. A Turkish politician suggested that Zionism may be behind the coronavirus because it, quote, serves Zionism's goals of decreasing the number of people. And a security and terrorism specialist on Turkish TV informed his audience that, quote, Jews, Zionists organized and engineered the coronavirus as a biological weapon. They want to design the world, seize countries, and neuter the world's population, close quote. Now, the Palestinians too libeled the Jewish state by declaring that Israel was using the virus in order to kill off Palestinians. This, despite the fact that Israel provided the Palestinian Authority with testing kits and swabs, facilitated the transfer of ventilators and protective gear, held training workshops for Palestinian healthcare workers, established joint monitoring groups, and did everything in its power to ameliorate the situation for Palestinian workers. Nonetheless, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, even while acknowledging his coordination with Israel, put forth the libel repeated by Palestinian media that IDF soldiers were deliberately attempting to infect Palestinians with the coronavirus as a genocidal tool. This is racism and hatred of people who long for the death of the other, he said. We will record this in the list of crimes against Israel. And after arranging with Israel to send Palestinian laborers back to their own homes, he accused Israel of using these laborers as carriers to transfer the virus to the Palestinian populace. Now, another form of libel we've seen is one that equates Jews/Zionists to the virus itself. It comes from a Turkish politician who proclaimed that, quote, Zionism is a 5,000-year-old bacteria that has caused the suffering of people, close quote. It comes from a BDS leader in Cleveland who dubbed the coronavirus the Zionovirus. It comes from anti-Israel writer and speaker Susan Abu Hawa, who tweeted that Israel is a pathogen, a 72-year-old coronavirus epidemic for the Palestinians. And then there's the greedy Jew trope that accuses Jews of profiting from the pandemic to the detriment of the general populace. For example, a white supremacist website, Christians for Truth, ran an article that was reposted on other anti-Zionist social media sites, slamming the Anti-Defamation League for applying for assistance in the wake of COVID-19. The ADL, the article maintained, expects the American taxpayers to subsidize their self-serving nation-wrecking agenda, they wrote. So we see that as they always do during adverse times and conditions, anti-Jewish libels have proliferated during the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's the revival of the old Simon of Trent libel, or a new spin on the old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And these libels are amplified in the age of the internet, where every mundane Jew hater has a social media platform. But at the same time, social media gives us opportunities and platforms to repudiate and condemn these libels. So how do we combat this type of anti-Semitism? Well, first we identify the libel and expose its perpetrators, publicizing the libel and calling on others to join us in condemning it. We publicly repudiate the libel, linking it with its historical precursors and pointing out its racist underpinnings and its responsibility for genocide in the past. We demand that the perpetrators publicly retract their libels and apologize for the harm that was done. And in the case of hate groups on social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, we appeal to platform moderators to remove the dangerous libels and close the accounts of those who allow it to be posted. We know from history that blood libels are not topics for legitimate debate, but false and dangerous weapons that have caused countless deaths. So we must look to history to avoid having history repeat itself. And now I'll take questions from all of you.
Thank you very much, Ricky. That was a terrific presentation. So I'm going to turn to the questions now. First question, would you consider the Deadly Exchange campaign a blood libel? And if you could please explain to our listeners and viewers what exactly the Deadly Exchange campaign is as well.
Well, yes, I would consider this a new version of blood libel, which has been raised to link Israel and its security forces, as well as mainstream American Jewish organizations, to racism and to killing, to George Floyd's killing. And for those of you who aren't acquainted with this particular libel, the Deadly Exchange campaign to demonize Jews was initiated and promoted by a group that calls itself Jewish Voice for Peace. As many of you may know, Jewish Voice for Peace is a BDS group that opposes the notion of a Jewish state. Now, the campaign was initiated 3 years ago, calling for an end to law enforcement exchange programs with Israel. They claimed that because they claimed that Israel and mainstream Jewish groups in America, actually the campaign calls out by name the ADL, JINSA, Birthright, AIPAC, American Jewish Committee, all these mainstream Jewish groups. The campaign accuses them of advancing racist policies in the US and targeting social justice movements by training American police in brutality, extrajudicial killings, shoot-to-kill tactics, police murder, attacks on human rights defenders, etc. In other words, they're saying that a cabal of Jews, these organizations, is orchestrating the bloodshed of non-Jews in America. And the ones perpetrating this libel are using their As a Jew platform to lend authority to their vilification of Jews. So we see all the same elements as the blood libel, as the original blood libel and all these blood libels. Bloodshed orchestrated by a cabal of Jews. So yes, I would definitely consider it a blood libel.
Thank you, Ricky. Yeah, it certainly sounds like one. Next question is, at a time of tremendous social upheaval focused on racial issues, is there any reason not to raise concerns about anti-Semitism? Can the approach be zero tolerance in the midst of a maelstrom like we're encountering?
Of course, we always have to have zero tolerance for any sort of racism, and yes, there should be zero tolerance. Now, while we should not be appropriating other people's grievances if they don't apply to us, we shouldn't just appropriate somebody else's grievance just to tack our own grievances on it. But we have an obligation to stand in solidarity and to campaign against racism of all sorts, racism against people of color and against any persecuted minority. But if we look away when we see examples of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish racism, then our campaigning in support of any other kind of racism would be completely ludicrous. It would be just virtue signaling. Of course, we have to. I mean, we should look to history there was the Jewish sage Hillel who said, if I don't stand for myself, then who will stand for me? And if I stand only for myself and not for others, then what am I? And if not now, then when? So again, we look to history and to get the answer to that.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to try and sum up here. It is, Madeline writes, I think it's important for rabbis to inform and educate their temple members and community about the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic platform of Black Lives Matter. She discussed this with her rabbi, who understands that there is a problem, but unfortunately he feels unable to speak out or write on the topic as members of his temple have resigned after the temple hosted an event with a conservative speaker. So how can we get the word out to all the different Jewish individuals and others who are supporting Black Lives Matter without taking into account the initial platform, which of course was anti-Israel and anti-Semitic?
Well, I think that we have to be very specific in what we criticize and be very specific about criticizing the anti-Semitism. So we don't criticize the general banner of Black Lives Matter. I mean, we stand in solidarity with the struggle for racial justice, but we can still at the same time oppose and condemn and repudiate the type of anti-Jewish racism and libels that they've used and point them out. We have an obligation to do that without condemning the blanket Black Lives Matter, because it's a very loosely organized, it includes many different groups, and not all of them are anti-Semitic. So we have to be specific about what we condemn, but we do have an obligation to condemn anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish racism whenever and from wherever we see it.
Thank you. And Gerald asks, I think he makes an interesting point here. Years ago, it is perhaps understandable that blood libels would have had some basis in believability because many people were very ignorant and followed groupthink. But today, with the advent of science and scientific data, could these be used to prove or disprove any allegations? And how does that factor in?
Well, so we have to do like what type of allegation? Well, what we've seen is that science and reason really plays no role in believing or perpetrating the blood libel, because the people who want to promote it and want to believe it do so anyhow. But to the wider public, yes, that's exactly what we do have to point out: the ludicrousness and the racism and the motivation behind these blood libels. So for the people who perpetrated, I don't think that we would have any that science or reason would play no role in convincing them otherwise. But for the wider, for the most people, I think that yes, we do have.
Then Amy has, I think, of course, another excellent question here. How do you balance First Amendment freedoms with the need to respond to libels? Is there a possibility that backlash could happen within the African-American community if someone like Nick Cannon is seen as a martyr/victim?
Well, I think that we have, again, I think specificity is really the most important. If somebody raises an idea, talks about, say, is there such a thing as ritual killing, or let's discuss ritual killing, then yeah, that's an idea. I think people can debate an idea of ritual killing, but when it applies only to a certain race and it's meant specifically to demonize that race, then it no longer, I don't think it's a valid exchange of ideas anymore. It's not an idea, it's racism. You have to differentiate between a broad idea that applies to everybody or a specific idea that applies and is used for a specific race.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a moderator's prerogative here and ask a question myself. So it seems to me you discussed how the printing press was used to disseminate and the blood libel hundreds of years ago. Could this be considered analogous to social media today? Do you think there's that would be a fair comparison?
I do. Yes, as I said, the printing press, I think, is compared to the media. If the media promotes any media, for example, promotes the deadly exchange libel as truth. That's part of it, and social media. So a lot of these blood libels nowadays are promoted in social media, although some of them flip into the media as well. So yes, it's totally analogous to the written word.
Thank you. And Christopher has a question. How can we, as the smallest minority of various factions, underscore that mainstream Jewry must pay attention lest the rise of somebody like Hitler occur again?
Well, I think that just speaking out against the horrible and devastating effects of racism of any sort, looking to history, providing historical examples of what happened, of the sort of genocide that racism and libels have promoted, it is a way to go about doing that, spreading the word.
Another question, has Louis Farrakhan promulgated any blood libels?
Yes, Farrakhan. Yes, he has, and I'm not. He's a. He definitely supported Hitler. I mean, he has, and he's, I think, known, and we have to show and spotlight his anti-Semitic remarks and publicize it and discredit him in that way, and discredit his rhetoric.
Seems quite necessary. Marshall has a great question. Given the double-edged sword of the internet, do you have any concerns that confronting anti-Semitic libels just gives them more oxygen?
No, I think that if they're not, when they're not confronted and they're not opposed, then more and more people believe it. If something's not countered, then it becomes accepted. It becomes legitimate. It legitimizes it. Of course, it depends where these things. If it's confined, if it's confined to a group that's to an anti-Semitic group, we're not going to go to that anti-Semitic moderator and ask him to, and try to convince him that this is a libel. But we could go to the host, the platform that hosts that anti-Semitic group, and say, look, here is an example of libel, and you should cancel the account. This is dangerous hate rhetoric.
And Sunny has, I think, a question that kind of varies a bit. So asks, why can't libels be challenged in a court of law? Of course, in some places they can, but it differs. Ricky, if you want to.
No, I'm not a legal expert, and I don't know. I mean, it depends. I can't really comment about what would constitute a legal libel. I mean, the laws differ in different countries. I know the U.S. differs from England and Canada. Right. So I'm not an expert on the what constitutes libel and when you can sue. You'd have to ask legal that.
And another questioner points out, one of the most noxious hate groups peddling blood libels is the Nation of Islam, and the degree of toleration for them is stunning. Why aren't Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam actively confronted?
Well, I do think they are actively confronted. I mean, people are countering them, and they are exposing their hate rhetoric. Perhaps not enough, but that just means that we have to, work harder at our job.
Right. Okay, and then another question is, questioner wants to know, does appealing to Facebook or Twitter or other social media platforms to remove blood libels and hate, is that an option? How cooperative are those social media platforms?
Well, we know that that's changing. That's always changing, and I think that now that Twitter and Facebook are under more pressure to remove hate rhetoric or to remove certain types of things that they consider hate rhetoric, I think that we will now have a greater opportunity to have them remove blood libels at the same time. This is a shifting ground. First there was freedom of speech, but now there's more and more pressure on them to remove hate rhetoric. So I think that we have to continue to remove libels.
Thank you. And Bob wants to know, he says you listed a long list of examples of current blood libels. Can you offer any specific examples of what was done to combat that had successful outcomes?
You mean the ones in Turkey and Iran? Okay, well, there was a libel where, first of all, most of these were exposed. So first of all, outside of Iran, we didn't do anything inside Iran, but these were exposed. So that outside of Iran, outside of these Arab countries, it was actually publicized. But a blood libel, like a libel, coronavirus libel, that I can talk about which by an actress. Something about it was, if I have to remember it, but it was something about the Israeli Jews having come up with a vaccine for the coronavirus, but withholding it and allowing people to die until an opportune moment comes so that they could earn more money. This was
Rosanna Arquette, I believe.
Yes, Rosanna Arquette. So that was exposed and that was combated, and she came back, she removed the tweet, she apologized for the harm she did, and I think it really did make a difference. I mean, it had an effect. The disputing it, pointing out that this is akin to a blood libel, made her stop and think, and she did remove it, and she was shamed, and she did apologize.
Another questioner wants to know, and this is of course a very recent event, but it does pertain to anti-Semitism. Does Barry Weiss's resignation from the New York Times signal that anti-Semitism is no longer okay in the liberal media?
Well, I guess we'll have to see what happens next. It's too early to say what Yeah, we have to see. We have to wait and see.
Okay, and then this will be the final question here. Is there a perfect storm forming from the economic and health distress, in addition to speeches by high-level politicians, even some presidential candidates, to consider America's social justice problems based on the rich versus the poor, particularly the workers who are oppressed by the rich, something that can cause a strong new wave of anti-Semitism and conspiracy beliefs? So in short, is there a perfect storm brewing for the possibility of something like pogroms or greater anti-Jewish violence?
Well, I certainly hope not, but we do have to remain vigilant, and we have to put out small fires before they become a conflagration. So that's exactly why we have to put out these smaller fires and combat smaller anti-Semitic tweets and posts and libels when we see it, before it becomes a conflagration.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Ricky. Unfortunately, our time is up. Now, if you liked today's conversation, Camera has several more talks scheduled for this summer. On July 22nd, Camera Spanish media analysts Masha Gabriel and Marcelo Uyo will be presenting on the Spanish media and the fueling of anti-Semitism. This unique presentation will be entirely in Spanish and is part of Camera's continuing and unique contributions to the Spanish-speaking community. If you're interested in this or the rest of Camera's summer programming, please send an email to tracy@camera.org. That's Tracy, Tracy, @camera.org. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.